Hi HR Nation, welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today we have a very special guest on the show. We're joined by Heather Monahan, who's a best-selling author, top 40 female keynote speaker, TEDx speaker, and host of the Creating Confidence podcast. Today we're going to be talking about Heather's most recent book, Overcome Your Villains. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Chris, I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to see you.
And for those that can see you, it's on the wall behind you. All right, give us a spin in the chair. Just in case they missed it.
Yeah, no, HarperCollins Leadership is the publisher for this new book. And they said to me, day one, we want that image everywhere. You want it imprinted on everyone's mind.
Yeah, well, it's a whole new world, right, of launching a book during virtually. You sort of, in this landscape, it's a new thing for everyone having to do that.
The strategies are totally different. My first book I launched in 2018, and that was back when you did book signings and you went to events and today it's so different. It's all about creating a VIP virtual book launch team and virtual meetups on Facebook. And Crazy. It's a completely different strategy.
Yeah. And you self-published, right? The first one.
My first book. Yes, I did.
Wow. From what I've been told, that takes a piece of you away. Chris, it takes a big part of you away. It's a lot of work to both write your first book and self-publish. It's tough.
You know what? Here's the thing. I believe in speed to market, right? My background is as a chief revenue officer in corporate America, and speed to market's critical in any space. So when you self-publish, everything is going through the lens of one person, one decision maker, and you can move rapid fire quick. So it took me 5 months to write and self-publish my first book. However, my second book, I'm doing the traditional way, and I'm 2 years in and just launching the book now. Yeah.
Wow. So that's a very good piece. That's a very good context. You're right. You haven't got no red tape, right? It's just you.
Exactly. There's zero red tape, and there's no large corporation behind you that you have to get approvals through.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing I realized, when I started this company, and it was so refreshing for me and Shane, my co-founder, just to make decisions. Like going from a large corporate business, all the headaches and the politics and everything, I was like, oh, this is exhausting. And now we can really outpace our competitors so quickly. Like when the pandemic hit, we were like, boom, pivot, out, launch. And then whilst everyone else was thinking about what do we do, we're already making it happen. Anyways, before we go any further, tell everyone, I'll give you kind of a brief intro, but tell everyone a little bit more about yourself personally and your journey to where we are now.
Yeah, my background is in sales and sales leadership. I was always in corporate America, started in the radio business as an account executive and just worked my way up, VP of sales, EVP to chief revenue officer. And then in fourth quarter of 2017, I was named one of the most influential women in radio. And then 2 weeks later, I was fired when the CEO I had worked for 14 years became ill, and he elevated his daughter to replace him.
No. What? And then she fired you?
Yes.
But that was one of her first decisions coming in.
That she was coming in hot with a very big decision. And so she did not, publicize that. Of course, no one's publicizing that they get rid of the revenue generator when you're in an industry in decline. And so I noticed that nobody was calling me. So I took a chance and I put a post up on LinkedIn and said, hey, I've just been fired after 14 years of consecutive advancement and awards. I am really hurting today. And if I've ever helped you, I need to hear from you now. And that post went viral. And I had so many great opportunities that stemmed out of it.
That's amazing, by the way. But there's so many reasons that's amazing. One, just the you being so vulnerable and putting that out there, but the strength that comes with that vulnerability, right? That you don't really realize. I don't know if you did realize that going in, but it's not many people do that. That's pretty incredible. Was you surprised by the reaction that you got?
Yeah, I was overwhelmed by how many people, haters are going to come when you do something like that, right? Like, it's happening, but I was overwhelmed by the love and support and opportunity, and I looked at it originally as, through the lens of business. And if I'm going to own something, I need to own a white space. I can't go compete in this space where everybody else is. So I decided to reframe getting fired as in good company. J.K. Rowling's been fired. Steve Jobs has been fired. Mark Cuban's been fired. all of these ultra successful people, they had these pivotal moments in their career, and getting fired was really the launching point for them. And so that's the lens I decided to look at my career journey through. And that's sort of how I've marketed myself since then.
Yeah. What was that moment then when you decided, I'm not going back to work for a corporate, I'm going out on my own?
There wasn't a one moment. That is a journey that probably took somewhere around 2 years. Because I had 25 years in corporate America, that's all I knew, right? I had this expertise and this network that now I was just disappearing from. So very often in my first 2 years, I would say, well, I'm doing this right now until I probably go back. I always was keeping one foot back in, this old door and one foot in this new potential business, because I was just scared to commit that I would actually go all in on my own.
It's scary, right? And by the way, like one of the inspirations behind this, just before my last job, I got fired, and it was basically the CEO ended up hiring his best friend. So it's kind of like not the daughter scenario, but basically CEO hiring his best friend who had no idea what he was doing, and we clashed. And despite being the highest revenue generator, I was in sales too. I got fired because I was just saying how it was, and no, he didn't want to hear it. Like, no one in the entire global sales team respects your best friend, and it's not his fault because he's never done sales, and you've put him in this position to fail, and you don't like to hear it because he's your best friend and your best man at your wedding. But I have to tell you this, and it was just like, well, do I fire my best friend, or do I fire Chris? And it was me. And the worst part about it was, like, 3 or 4 months later, he did end up firing his best friend, because he finally realized. And I was like, and I got an apology years later, but it was like, man. And then it was at that moment where I was like, you know what? I can't be doing this. I went to work for another company for a short period whilst I figured out what am I actually going to do. But at the entire time I was there, I was planning my escape. I was like, I need this money in the meantime because I have a mortgage, I have a family. But I was completely like, I'm using this. It sounds bad, but I was using that salary to like plan my next. I was still doing the work, obviously, but I was planning my escape. But onto this new book, what was the inspiration, behind this new book, Overcome Your Villains?
Well, one of the things that I live by is that data doesn't lie, right? So if you have any type of social media presence and people are asking you questions over and over again, that's a potential business venture or product that maybe you haven't leaned into yet. So for me, after I wrote my first book, I would always get questions around, so what happened after you got fired? How did you get to where you are today? What were the steps that you took? How did you bounce back so quickly? So I kept a Word doc, and I would compile all of the questions I would get from people on social media. And when I sat down to write my new book, I really looked at it through that lens of what people were asking me for, because if I can create products and services around answering those questions for them, that will bring them value. And that was really the concept behind Overcome Your Villains.
Mm-hmm. So who's this for then? Who's this book for?
The book is a powerful 3-step process to overcome any adversity in business or in life. So it's really anyone that is confronting a challenge, whether that they're confronting the challenge today or they're afraid of a challenge in the future, they're afraid of a change, they're nervous, they're stuck. Anybody who has had a situation in the past and said, oh gosh, I don't want to have to deal with that again, some type of a head-on difficult scenario, this book will teach you how to get through it, get over it, and get to the next level.
Yeah. Well, it seems pretty timely then, given the last 18 months we've had behind us. And so many of us have had that time to reflect and say, is this really what I want to do with my life? And I don't know about you, but a lot of my friends, family members, and network are like jumping ship, starting their own companies. And with that comes these hurdles and challenges, right? And overcoming your villains. Yeah,
but even if you're staying in a company, right? Even if you're someone who likes your company, we've all, right? I was at the same company for 14 years, and it wasn't always that I was in some awful environment, but there were times where, what you were saying earlier, I would feel like I had a great idea and I wasn't being heard, or somebody wasn't making time to listen. We're all facing these micro challenges along the way. And so often we just turn a blind eye to them and get frustrated, which is not the answer, right? That's not going to fix the problem. That's not going to create a more confident individual in ourselves, nor is it going to solve problems in the organization. So it's really about addressing things head on, communicating clearly, putting yourself first and sharing your ideas and opinions in any environment.
Mm-hmm. Well, give us some more insight into the 3-step process that you share in the book in terms of how you overcome challenges.
So a couple of years ago, a mentor of mine said, to get to the next level, you've got to share a simple process that you keep implementing in your life that allows you to keep getting ahead. And it took a while to really sit down and distill it to something very simplistic because, I thought I don't have one. But then as I would write down the different times in my life, I started seeing patterns that were showing up. And the pattern for me, which has worked time and time again, and it will work for others. I've already seen it working for other people as I've had advanced readers reading the book. It's called the BAK process, BAK, and it's all around beliefs, action, and knowledge. And I'll give you just the example of getting fired. What I did was that first day, I was saying to myself, I've lost everything, right? The sky is falling. Yeah, I know how it feels.
Yeah.
Of course, right? Everyone does that. But the process is about distilling that belief or that story you're telling yourself to the most simplistic level that includes fact only. And when I distilled it, here's what I lost. I lost a paycheck. And once I realized I didn't lose my network, I didn't lose my expertise, I didn't lose my talents and skills and potential, I lost a paycheck. I've had other paychecks. It didn't seem that scary anymore once I distilled it to that, basic fact. So that's step one. Step two, and this is super important for everyone, is to immediately take some level of action to move yourself forward. That can be big, it can be small. For me, it was to raise my hand and post on social media and ask for help. That was my action step that I took. And that in turn creates opportunity for you in any type of scenario. When you take action to do something differently and advance yourself, opportunity will come to you. And then third, it's all around the knowledge that you intentionally access. For a long time, I might be deferring to asking my family what they think or my friends, I grew up with. Well, this is really about intentional curated knowledge. So asking people who have been where you want to go for information, accessing podcasts like this one, right? For someone who wants to know what it's like to get ahead in sales or in corporate America, you want to go somewhere and access the knowledge of somebody who's already done it, not people that you wouldn't ask for advice in the first place.
Yeah, love that. So much to unpack there as well. On the second part, you mentioned it's important to do it quickly. Is there a reason why?
Yes, because that's where so many people get stuck, especially women, is what I've seen, during my time in corporate America, this fear or trepidation to take action. And that was one big differentiator for me in my time in corporate America. I just am an action person. That's something that comes more natural to me. And again, we all have different skill sets, and some people are really great at, curating the knowledge that they're going to access and immersing themselves. And that doesn't come natural to me. I have to really be intentional about it. Right. So, but the action stuff always came natural to me. And that was a big differentiator. So the reason why I say it's so important to do it immediately is don't give yourself that window of time to get stuff. Just know that, okay, I've distilled the belief. Now my job is to take action in this moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I love about having the 3-step process. Like you said, you're taking the emotion away and you're just focusing on following the steps. Because otherwise we can get caught up in our own thoughts, right? And in our mind, we can have our own villain in our own mind, right? We all have that self-doubt, etc. And if you leave it too long, it then compounds and becomes more challenging. So I get that. I completely get that as well. Like when I had that position with that job that I got let go of, I think I had a job 3 days later. I just literally reached out to my network, messaged as many people as possible, saw, immediately got, again, I think that's also a benefit of working in sales, right? Is you're not worried about going out there, messaging people. If you get a no, you don't care really, because, if
you're used to it.
You're used to it. Yeah. And that's something I realized I took for granted. So for me, as soon as I got over, being upset, the walk home, feeling down for myself, sorry for myself, the next day I just, wrote a template and messaged it to 1 million people and was in a job. But I realized that's not normal. That's part of being, that skill set of you build as a salesperson. along the
But
way.
that's what I want to become normal is, yes, you and I know this from years of experience in sales, but everybody should have this information that the key is to take action and to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep creating those opportunities. You wouldn't have landed that job 3 days later if you hadn't peppered out all of those messages. It's a numbers game and you were willing to take the action and do it.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing. Like literally this morning, one of my guests after the show said, Chris, how do you get all these amazing guests on the show? I was like, well, I asked them. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, the difference between me and everyone else is people won't even ask, let alone, they're so worried about getting a no or being rejected. I'm like, for every one amazing guest that you see, there may be 100 people that said no, but you just see the success. You just see the podcast and the great guests. You don't see the thousands of no's that have come along the way. And obviously the more we've grown the show, the easier it is to get guests. But most people aren't even willing. And I love the third part about reaching out. And I've done that so many times in my career in areas where I've been, lost and had no idea and just reach out to experts and complete strangers, that I don't even know on LinkedIn that I reach out saying, can you please help me? And you'd be amazed at the amount of people that reach out, right? And be willing to help. It's incredible.
Oh, absolutely. And that's how we got connected, right? I was speaking to somebody about my new book coming out and they said, you need to reach out to Chris. And I just sent you a DM saying, hey, Chris, this is something I'm working on. We haven't met yet. And you're like, let's jump on a call and let's talk about it. So that's even how we met. And to your point about, it's a numbers game. I remember when I was pitching my agent on my new book, I pitched her 14 times. 14 times she told me no. And it was on the 15th pitch that I landed her and got the yes. And too often people just walk away saying, oh, I guess I wasn't meant for this or I wasn't good enough. No, we just haven't framed it up in the right way yet to convey our message or to reach, our potential target.
Yeah. And every time you get a no, you learn something new. And it's just amazing. Like, just the old sales saying, you're one step closer to a yes, right? Every no is one step closer to a yes. And I remember when I first heard that and I was like, oh, that's very cheesy, but it's true. And not only you're one step closer, but if you take the time to listen, like you would have probably listened to that agent, right? And understand what is it they're looking for, you continuously tailor that message to them. And then in the end, you will win. But you can't see it. And I love your post on LinkedIn recently with the child trying to jump up and you was like, this is me pitching my book to my agent. And it's so true though. And there's no wonder it had thousands of likes because people on LinkedIn can relate to those.
Yeah. And for anyone who didn't see that, there was this young girl on this viral video who kept trying so hard, a really young girl, to jump up and land on a box jump. And she just, every time she fell a little short and kept face planting, and it was painful to watch her, but she would not quit. And in the end, she landed it.
Exactly. That, yeah, I love that. What tips would you give to people then that are working in a toxic environment, whether it be at work or at home? What advice would you give to them?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's a little different work versus home, but I would say in work, number one, you need to stand up and communicate clearly first, because so often I found that people will be upset that I'm being disrespected, I'm not getting the promotion, I'm not treated fairly, but they're not verbalizing that in a clear manner to that other person. So the other person has no idea, right? I don't know how you're feeling, and I can't assume that other people are going to know how I'm feeling. So calling a meeting and asking for a sit down. I'm confused as to why I'm not getting the promotion. Every time we meet, you're talking about what a great job I'm doing. Can you elaborate and give me a little bit more information? My goal is to get that next move, that next advancement, right? Being really clear and direct. And I like to use 3 different terms that I have found to be really helpful. One is I'm confused, because it's not attacking someone.
I love it. It disarms it, doesn't it? It's like a disarming. I love that.
It is. It's an open-ended question/statement that's putting the onus on the other person to explain, right? So you're going to get some information back, which is what you need. The other one that I really like is help me to understand.
Ooh, yeah.
Right? Help me to understand why Jody got the promotion and I didn't. You keep telling me I'm doing a great job. Or and the third one is tell me more about that. So the more we can get someone to empty their glass and give us the information that they're holding, that we, once we have that information, then we can go back in to negotiate, or we can say, okay, based on what you're telling me, I need to do A, B, C, and D to rectify the situation, and then I'll get the advancement.
Yeah, I love that. And both personally and professionally, don't you find that a lot of time our negative thoughts and assumptions are unfounded? Like we assumed all
Very
these
often.
bad, and it's like when you get your kind of annual review as a manager or as an individual, you're like, really? They think that of me? I can't believe it. Why didn't they say something, right? And you have no idea. Or on the other end, like you mentioned earlier, you have an issue, but that person has no idea that you even had an issue. And sometimes it's a simple answer, but we just work ourselves up. And I love those 3 ways of approaching it, which really kind of disarm, any confrontation, and you're kind of asking the individual, can you please help me understand why? And it just, oh yeah, and sure, I'm happy to help you understand why as well. Love that. Yeah.
And then you brought something up earlier, which this would really be the next step. Once you've used one of those lines to initiate the dialogue, is then be an active listener. Truly sit and listen from a place of curiosity. Even if you're frustrated with the person or the situation, put that at the door for a moment, put a pin in it, right? You can pick up that anger and frustration later, but really sit down to understand and be curious as to why they're behaving in the way they are, and truly listen to them. And if you do that, it is fact, it's science, another person's brain will start emitting dopamine if you're truly actively listening to them. And in turn, they start liking you, right? So you're sitting down with someone that you're frustrated with, you're asking open-ended questions, you're actively listening to them, they begin to emit dopamine, and suddenly they want to help you solve your problem.
Mm-hmm. Everyone likes to be listened to and heard, right?
Yes.
Like anyone who's like if you think about your best friends and best work colleagues, they're the people that listen and care, and and there's real intent behind it as well. There's a difference between like listening and then listening and being present or being quiet, I should say, because some people just sit there and like you're talking, they're like looking around the place and not really engaged, and there's others that are genuinely engaged, and I didn't know there was science behind that, but the fact it's releasing that dopamine as well, it makes so much sense.
Well, what I just pictured when you explain that is, and I know you've seen this before because we've both been on a lot of podcasts, is you go on a good podcast and someone asks you questions, and maybe they prepared questions, but now your conversation turns and they turn, right? They turn to the direction you're going and they follow up questions to what you're saying, versus we've been on shows before where they have these set questions
and skip to the next one.
And it makes no sense. And everyone's saying, wait a minute, what happened to what she was just, I don't understand. There isn't active listening going on. Even maybe it's because the person is nervous or whatever. But it's really clear when someone is not actively listening.
And again, I know we said it before, but it comes back to sales, right? If you're good in sales, that's an essential skill to be good at, right? Otherwise, or because if you want to jump off to your next feature and benefit, you've lost a client, right? They're trying to tell you what their challenges are, needs. And you're like, let me go. Oh, I need to go to my next feature and benefit of our product, and you're like, oh, it's painful to hear people do that as well. Yeah,
we've all seen it though.
We've all seen it. It's painful. Yeah, we've all been on those calls on both ends of the spectrum. Could you share some stories? Because you said you're very vulnerable. In both the books, right? How do you balance how much of yourself to give away? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally does. And thank you for asking that. I worked back in corporate America alongside a woman that appeared to be perfect, and there was always this pressure that I was supposed to be perfect too. Well, we know no one's perfect. That was BS. That was a whole, it was a front. It wasn't real. And it didn't make me feel like I wanted to run through a wall for her. In fact, it made me feel more distance from her, right? So once I went out on my own, I was really committed to showing up as a real version of me, because I felt like I didn't have that freedom, for a few years, that I was really being confined and told what to do. So for my first book, I shared a number of different things that some of which, I felt shameful about, whether, at first being fired, I felt shame around that. And what I've learned is that the minute you start shining a light on shame, you extinguish it and you start feeling better about yourself. It's not about what other people are going to think, right? Some people are going to be upset no matter what and have, judgment on you. That's about them, but it's about you. And how can you, I'm not saying I've done things perfectly my whole life. I wish some of the things I had done, I made better choices, but I own who I am, right? I'm not embarrassed about it. I've done some things wrong. I've made some mistakes. I own them. I learn from them. I move on. And the first book was the first time I had ever publicly done something like that. Super scary, but the results or the feedback or, it was just overwhelming that, okay, I'm going down the right path. Cut to the new book. And it's funny, a friend of mine just read my new book and he had already read the first one. He said, Heather, it's really weird because you're a much more powerful version of yourself in the new book. And I appreciated him saying that because I truly am. And the only reason why is I was working in a negative environment where somebody was trying to hold me back. My confidence was really low. I got fired and I wrote that first book. So I wasn't coming at it from this place of strength. I was coming at it from a place of, holy cow, I'm going to try this new and I'm scared to death. And now here we are a couple years later, and I've really stepped into owning who I am, which allows me to share more, which allows me to show up with more strength. So it hasn't been something that happened overnight. It's really been a journey for me.
I love that. And I think a big part of it as well, people can resonate with you. Like, it's so refreshing when you speak to someone or you hear someone like yourself that says it how it is, because it's not all perfect. And I realized the more open I became on the podcast and our events and stuff, the more vulnerable I become, you know, talking about my own challenges, mental health and well-being as an example, something I was ashamed of for many years. All of a sudden, you know, people feel like, oh, Chris is human. He's not perfect. I can relate to him. And it kind of builds a relationship with your community and your followers, you know, whatever you may want to call it, which is so powerful. Like I meet people that listen to the show right now and again that I don't know. And they're like, they start saying stuff about me that I didn't even know that I spoke about on the show. Like, Chris, how's your daughter, right? How's Robin getting on? And, you know, how's this? And I'm like, whoa, like, you know a lot about me that I didn't even realize that I speak about. But I realized that as soon as I got rid of the, you know, shirt and tie and this sort of this fake suit I had to put on to please everyone and become this version of Chris, like, I used to even talk a certain way because I thought that that's what people wanted to hear, right? For so long. And it's exhausting. So exhausting.
It is exhausting. That is so right. And there's only so many hours in a day and so much energy any one of us have. It's really important that you brought that up for everyone listening, because the more you do start showing up as that real version of you, the more you're going to have energy to put to the things you want to have that currently you're saying, I crash at the end of the day. I can't make it through the day. It might be because you're expending so much energy on showing up as a different version of you.
Yeah. Because people say to me, friends and family, oh, you must be exhausted, Chris. You do these shows, you work on weekends. I'm like, no, this is fun. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, you see this as work, but I'm having fun conversations with great people. So it's a different of context, right? You're exhausted because you're having to portray and this version of yourself or turn up to a job that you don't even want to be there as well. And that's where the energy gets sucked from you, right? If you love what you do, then you can go home and watch Netflix. I'm going to say here and do work, which for me isn't even work as well. Is this like a skill you can develop into, you know, in terms of like just resilience and overcoming, you know, your villains? Is this a muscle you think you can develop?
Absolutely. It's the same way that I believe confidence is a muscle that you can develop. And I only know that from my own personal experience. The more you do anything, the better you're going to get at it. And so for me, you know, when I started out, you know, in the past few years, really focusing on doing these different things and having these initiatives to develop more resilience, to become more confident, I became like I would with anything. I have a clear goal in mind, right? So get really clear on where you want to go. You know, what do you want to look like? Give yourself a timeline. Hold yourself accountable and start just like if you were going to lose weight, right? I want to lose 5 pounds in 30 days, and that tracks to X amount of pounds per week. Here's the action steps I'm going to take to create it. And then start celebrating your wins. It's no different with overcoming adversity, right? Feel proud of, wow, you know, someone I really don't like that doesn't treat me well asked me to go to this event, and I let them know, you know what, thanks so much for offering. I'm fully committed. I'm not going to be able to make it. That's a win right there if you haven't been doing that, right? So as you start to do those things and then you see the other person just says, okay, see you later. And they're fine. And you say, oh my gosh, that wasn't as hard as I thought.
Yeah.
Suddenly that opens up more opportunity for you to do it again.
On that point then, you know, in the last book, you don't include much exercises, but in this book, you include a lot of exercises. Why did you decide to add them this time around?
So again, I'll go back to data doesn't lie. I work with a team at HarperCollins Leadership they're experts in this field. I'm not, right? I'm a rookie with 2 books. They have 2 million books under their belt. So there were certain things that they brought to the table that I really valued. And so I would say in business books, you know, over the past couple of years, what are some of the standards that you see you're getting great feedback on? What are some of the things not working? And so we would go through the data on, you know, what's landing with people and not. And they brought up to me, one of the things other people really like is when they can do work on their own when the book's over. So it's not just one and done. And I thought to myself, okay, data doesn't lie. I have a podcast. I've been putting exercises with certain podcasts I have, people had things and I was like, I'd say that's an exercise. And I created an exercise and I would start looking at downloads, and the exercises I picked for the book, I took from the podcast because I was able to see those were the ones most downloaded. So those were the ones that landed with my people, helped them. And so I wanted to bring that to the book as well.
Could you share one of those with our listeners that they can do?
Oh, yeah, sure. So one of the exercises in the new book is all around, people will say there's toxic positivity, right? And I've heard this about me too, that you're too positive all the time and no one can be like that. Okay, cool. I get it, right? I have bad days too. Maybe you don't see them, but I sure do. So it's this whole concept around, instead of just always be positive, let's shift to what is neutral. And it's a practice that when things get really bad, so global pandemic, you're stuck at home, everyone's miserable. I'm not asking you to wake up and say, today's going to be a great day. No. Okay. You're probably not going to say that. Right. But you could say, today I'm going to get some work done, right? Like start looking at things through a neutral lens instead of it has to be positive or it has to be negative. It can just be. And you actually have to write the things down. And I give examples for each one. This would be framing it up in a negative regard. Here's a neutral regard and here's a positive one. What is right for you on that day? But my ask is at least try it in a neutral if you can't get it to positive. And then in the end, you'll eventually start being able to go from neutral to positive.
Mm-hmm. What's the end goal of that exercise? For it to
so many people, just the biggest villain is in their own head, right? And you mentioned this earlier. So listen, there can be lots of villains around us at work, toxic environments, whatever. But in the end, it's ourselves that really hold ourselves back. And given the climate in the world today and the news, and there's a lot of negativity, it rubs off on people differently. 100%. So if you constantly look at things through a poor me lens and a everything's going to be bad lens, you're going to start attracting more of that in your life. So this exercise is trying to get people, yes, I get it. There are things that are awful right now, and I'm not minimizing that. However, I'm not going to live in that space. I'm going to look at what can be and what doesn't have that negative connotation to it. Yes, we're in a global pandemic and there are less in-person meetings. However, there are also virtual meetings, which allow me to be with Chris today, where otherwise I'd have to be on a plane to come see you. So there are ways to take the negative and bring it back to neutral. And the more you practice and discipline yourself to do that, the more you can let go of just this constant negativity.
Yeah. I love the book. I think like what you're doing, I feel like now is like your book's so important now more than ever, considering where we are, both internally, companies, externally, home. That voice in your head, right? Whatever villains that we're facing, we all have our villains, wherever they may be, as well. What's your, just out of curiosity, what's your favorite quote in the book?
Oh my gosh. The one that for me, it was just eye-opening was that, don't take direction from those who haven't been where you're going. That was a big one for me because I remember with my first book, my family didn't want me to launch it. And I almost pulled it because I thought, well, if your family doesn't want you to, and it took getting on the phone with my editor, someone who had been where I wanted to go. He had 19 books. And he said to me, Heather, how many books has your family written? I said, well, none. Why? What does that have to do with anything? He said, then take advice from someone who's written 19 and launch the book. And I'm so grateful because I felt a lot of trepidation, but I moved forward because it became clear to me, I am no longer going to look to people who haven't been where I want to go for advice. And that is really important because many of us make that mistake.
But listen, before I let you go, I love what you're doing. I'm really excited people to grab a copy of the book. But if there's sort of parting piece of advice, what would that be? And then where can people actually grab a copy of the book?
Adversity is always going to be coming for us. It's not something we can choose and it's not something we can forecast. I'm sure the past 2 years have taught us that. So why not learn a simple process that you can go ahead and repeat in your life to get you over the adversity sooner and faster than others and make your life easier so you can start going after more and reaching your potential.
Amazing. And where can people grab a copy of the book?
Go to overcomeyourvillains.com. And when you enter your order information, you get my $500 bonus bundle for free, my confidence video course, my workbook, my email program to get you up and running immediately.
Amazing. And as always, for everyone listening, the link is already below. wherever you're listening is below in the description. But thank you so much for coming on the show, Heather. Like, I love your energy. I love what you're doing. We've only known each other for a few weeks, but like, you've been such a help for me too. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, I appreciate you, Chris. You're the best.
No worries. See you later. Bye-bye.